I love you.
Yes,
I love you.
yes, sir.
I think if they hadn't used excessive force, he would still be here today.
This man died after being restrained by police. These same words were uttered 2 years later by George Floyd, whose death sparked outrage on both sides of the Atlantic. In the UK, if you're black, you're more than twice as likely as a white person to die in police custody.
Relax and you won't get hurt.
This has got to stop.
He's not alive today because of the colour of his skin.
Panorama investigates unanswered questions in 2 British deaths. And in one, reveals new allegations of police cover-up. What you're saying is that those accounts are false?
Yes.
Are you okay?
This is Kevin Clark.
Yeah. You look cool.
He suffers episodes of mental ill health.
Can I feel your hands?
Police officers have come to help him.
How many have you got?
In a little over 2 hours, he will be dead.
A man has died after being restrained by police in southeast London. Officers say they were called to Lewisham on Friday afternoon, where they found the 35-year-old in an agitated state.
I never met anyone like Kevin. He was a unique person. He was everything to us. They took away my diamond.
Kevin Clark loved football. He was athletic. And he was close to his friends and family.
He was literally like a father figure. He was so caring. He took care of us, anything we wanted and needed. And it was a big, big piece of my life that's just been taken away.
Kevin was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia as a teenager. At the time of his death, he'd been living in supported accommodation.
He managed himself, he did everything just normal. It's only when he has a breakdown, then you just notice the change in his demeanour.
More than 2 years after Kevin's death, an inquest began in London. In court, his family watched his final hours play out in real time.
I'm a police officer, and we've had a call from where you're living at the moment.
The inquest heard Kevin's support team called police, fearing he was beginning to relapse.
Is there any reason that you're standing out on the street?
The officer decided he wasn't a threat to himself or anyone else.
I'm not going to stop you from chilling on the street.
Not long after Kevin's last seen at his supported accommodation, he finds his way to this street here. By this time, he's disorientated. He's in the full grip of a psychotic episode, and it's through the gaps between these houses that he finds his way into the school playing fields.
I saw him walking.
Marco Piccioni saw what happened next from his garden.
I can clearly remember, this is probably the thing I remember the best, is that he was in a bad state, you know, someone needing help.
Did he appear violent or aggressive or anything like that?
Not at all. It's just someone that is really mentally in a big crisis, I guess, yeah. That was obvious.
By the time police arrive, Kevin is clearly in trouble.
You all right? Hello? All right. Stay there, mate. You all right?
Yeah.
Okay, take a breath. Take a breath. Just stay there.
Yeah.
Realising he's having a mental health episode, they call an ambulance. The whole incident is being captured on multiple cameras worn by the attending officers. Panorama asked a leading expert in the use of restraint and police tactics to analyse the footage. Here, Kevin takes an officer's hand. She told the inquest jury she thought he had demonstrated extraordinary strength and had broken her hand.
Roll over a minute, mate.
Just go and look at your bus pass, all right?
It's hurting. You're hurting my hand.
No, easy.
To suggest, for what we've just seen there, that he was hurting the officer's hand is frankly nonsense.
What does it look like he's doing?
It looks like he's reaching out for help. And as soon as she says that you're hurting my hand, he takes his hand away.
Professor Leslie Thomas QC represented Kevin Clark's family at the inquest. He specialises in cases like these.
He wasn't a threat to anybody. And actually, when you watch the body cam footage very carefully, you see that one of the officers actually puts her hand on her taser as if she's ready to use it. And when you stop and ask yourself, what was the behaviour that Kevin had done to merit immediately being surrounded, all the officers stepping in, is he just got to his knees.
Oh, easy, mate, easy. Nice and easy, mate. Just here to help.
This is when the fateful decision to restrain Kevin is taken.
It's as if, without talking about it, they all have the same mindset that this is somebody who needs to be restrained.
Easy, mate, easy. Nice and easy. Nice and easy, that's it. And that one, that's it. That's it. That's it.
And what's that mindset based on?
Fear. Perhaps. Fear of what they see. What do they see? Big, black man. Fear.
The man is now in handcuffs. He's become quite aggressive to us. They need to hurry up. Has anyone got any leg restraints they can bring down, please?
The officers told control that he's become quite aggressive towards us.
Well, it's simply not true. He's not being aggressive at all, and he's not capable of being aggressive towards them. The suggestion of leg restraints, what on earth for? There is absolutely no justification at all for restraining him, and what they've done is just totally wrong and dangerous.
So why did it happen? Bas Javid is a commander in the Metropolitan Police.
Which element of Kevin's behaviour made it appropriate to restrain?
It's a fair question. So I think there was evidence and the circumstances at the time that he was in a position that he may well have harmed himself or other people. That was what the officers' findings were. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
What I'm asking you about specifically is whether you think the restraint in those circumstances was appropriate.
Look,
yes or no?
Clearly it wasn't. Clearly the restraint wasn't appropriate, no.
Black people are 3 times more likely to have force used on them than their white counterparts. How do you explain that?
I explain it by accepting that that's disproportionate, that it's not right. We need to understand the reasons why. Is there racial discrimination and bias and prejudice within an organisation? Absolutely. That's a reflection of society. Yes, there is. Yeah.
4 minutes into the restraint, and up to 6 officers are holding Kevin on the ground.
Listen.
And what he says is, I can't breathe. You're killing me. Several times.
Breathe. Deep breath.
8 minutes later, police and paramedics discuss how to get Kevin to the ambulance. They seem to lack urgency and fail to carry out a proper assessment of him.
So yeah, we're going to have to carry him down there
and then track them back to the ambulance.
15 minutes into the restraint, they decide to try and walk him to the ambulance. Then, an officer draws Kevin's hood over his head and uses it to pull him along.
What was your reaction to that? I was disgusted. They were meant to be checking his breathing and his vital signs. How can you do that with the hood over the head if he is meant to be the patient? So, not as a lawyer, not as a QC, not as a professor, just as another human being, I was disgusted.
He is forced to walk, though he's still bound at the knees.
It's gone down, hold on. Sit him up.
Doubled over, still cuffed behind his back, his breathing is impaired. He's been restrained for 19 minutes. Now, barely conscious, he is in fact dying. A year before Kevin died, a review of deaths in custody in England and Wales highlighted concerns around police stereotyping black people because of their perceived size or strength.
The evidence that we had was that many officers don't have very much to do with black communities other than when they're policing. Many of them described them in their statements that they prepared afterwards as being this huge man with superhuman strength, etc. And I don't challenge that that's what they believed at that time, or that was their perception. But the reality was very, very different.
They were just black?
Yes.
If you're black in the UK, you are more than twice as likely as a white person to die in or following police custody. Kevin Clark is one of at least 27 black men to die in such circumstances in the past 15 years.
Relax and you won't get hurt.
Some were suffering from mental breakdowns or altered behaviour at the time, including one man in Scotland.
The family of a man who died in police custody in Fife are demanding answers about what happened to him. Sheku Bayo was detained after an incident in Kirkcaldy.
He was fine. I saw him the day before. I couldn't believe that Sheku is no more. And my whole life changed. My whole life changed. Yeah, I brought these flowers. These are the flowers we bought for his birthday. Sheku don't come, who don't come, who they fight for justice, who they fight for justice. We haven't got closure yet because we don't know the truth. We just wanted to know how my brother died and why.
Sheku Bayo had moved to Kirkcaldy in Fife in 2000 to join his sister Caddy. He worked as a trainee gas engineer. He had a partner and was father to 2 boys.
He really lived for his boys. He was overprotective of his boys. They would never get to see fatherly love from Sheku.
Through the night of May the 2nd, 2015, Sheku Bayo had been at a friend's house. He'd taken drugs, MDMA and a hallucinogenic called flakka. Friends said it dramatically altered his behaviour and he'd become aggressive.
He then made his way home to his own house where he picked up a knife. Within a few minutes, he's on this street here. This is Hayfield Road, and it's 7 a.m, it's a Sunday morning, and the place is deserted. He's behaving erratically, so he's spotted by local residents who assume that he's high on drink or drugs, and they phone the police.
They tell police they've seen a man on the street with a knife. CCTV footage shows the first police arriving. Bayo no longer has a knife, a fact confirmed by statements taken later. The officers used force almost immediately, discharging their CS sprays and drawing batons. Bayo was brought to the ground within 45 seconds.
A witness sees up to 6 officers kneeling or lying across Sheku Bayo. She hears him scream, "Get off me!" By the time they do get off, it's too late. He's unconscious. The officers begin CPR. It's less than 5 minutes since the police first arrived, and Sheku Bayo is dying here on the street with his legs and his arms bound.
Sheku Bayo's cause of death would later be given as sudden death of a man intoxicated with drugs whilst being restrained. A post-mortem report revealed 23 separate injuries, including a broken rib and deep cuts to his head.
They've got information that he may be going through a crisis. He may be intoxicated. They could have contained that situation for longer to try and really exhaust every possible effort in trying to bring it to an end without using force, and particularly the high-level force that they used.
The officers initially refused to provide statements to investigators. Instead, 11 days after his death, the Scottish Police Federation, which represents rank-and-file officers, spoke for them. It said Bayo had violently attacked a female officer, Nicole Short.
The Police Federation gave out a statement which said a petite female police officer was chased and subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large male. She was punched, kicked, and stamped on. The officer believed she was about to be murdered, but for the intervention of other officers, that was the likely outcome.
The allegation Bayo had kicked and stamped on PC Short received prominent coverage.
When a black person dies in police custody, one of the first things that often happens is that there's a leak to the media, that police officers believed there was a threat to their life, that police officers had no other option.
But unknown to the public and the media, there was another civilian witness that day, and he'd given a statement to the body which investigates deaths in custody in Scotland, known as PERC. Identified in the case files as Witness R, Kevin Nelson has never spoken publicly before.
What did you see?
He was just walking, as if there was nobody there. Like he would walk along any street. He was just walking. It's like he was unaware that there was other people there, or purposely ignoring them. Just walking.
Kevin was watching from inside a nearby house on this side of Hayfield Road. He says he then saw Bayo being sprayed. Bayo retaliated and punched Nicole Short, who went down.
Was there any other contact with Bayo and that officer?
No. No. He was running off.
Kevin says he saw the events unfold over a garden hedge and had Bayo's upper body in his sights.
You saw Bayo 100% of the time during his altercation with Nicole Short?
Yes.
And just explain again what you saw.
I seen him swinging punches towards her.
And then what?
Then he ran off, or attempted to run off.
Kevin's account is supported by the CCTV. The footage is grainy, but we are able to identify the 2 key points of the incident. We can see Nicole Short knocked down here, and the action appears to immediately move away, and within 5 seconds, Sheku Bayo was brought down and restrained here. When the officers eventually provided statements to PERC investigators, 21 days after the Federation first spoke to the media, 2 of them described a violent stamping attack on Nicole Short. Those officers were known as Officers B and C. They are PC's Craig Walker and Ashley Tomlinson.
Both describe very clear detail Sheku Bayo viciously stamping on Nicole Short. Did that happen?
No. No.
You're sure?
Yeah. I don't think he would have had time to stamp. There was, after the punch, that was it. There was no more attack on her at all.
Officer B, I had a clear view of him and saw him with his right leg in a high raised position. He had his arms raised up at right angles to his body and brought his right foot down in a full force stamp onto her lower back. And you say that didn't happen?
That never happened. I didn't see him stamping at all, or other than the punch, any raised arms.
Officer C, Ashley Tomlinson, says, I thought he had killed her. He stomped on her back again.
No.
What you're saying is that those accounts are false?
Yes.
Nicole Short, now retired, later said she was unsure she was conscious and only heard she was stamped on when her colleagues told her afterwards. The CCTV appears to show her getting back to her feet a few seconds after being struck by Sheku Bayo.
It happened so quick.
Mike Franklin is a former commissioner with the body that investigates police complaints in England and Wales. We showed him our evidence.
I think there's nothing more serious than a police officer who gives false information in an investigation where somebody's died. So without accusing them of lying, I simply say that there's a big conflict in their evidence. Two officers who were there say that it did happen. The person to whom it happened didn't mention it, and an eyewitness says it didn't happen.
Kevin Nelson gave his account to investigators 2 days after the incident. That's 30 days before the officers.
Given what the officers said about this vicious stamping attack, are you surprised that nobody came back to check with you whether that had happened?
Yeah, not one person. Nobody.
If you were met with this sort of contradiction in evidence, what would you have done?
I would have been reluctant to sign off the investigation as complete without resolving those two conflicts of evidence.
Why are you doing this interview?
Their statements made me out to be lying, which is not fair on me, and it's not fair on Sheku and his family that they've made the incident worse than it actually was to justify what had happened, and that's not right.
You're saying is that those accounts are false?
Yes.
We showed Caddy the new allegations.
It's making me really angry because 5 years ago, the way they painted Sheku to be, that's not who he was. And now it's out there now.
In 2018, the Crown Office in Scotland, ultimately in charge of the Perk investigation, said no officer would face criminal charges. None has faced misconduct charges either. But the questions in this case persist, and a full public inquiry is now underway. Police Scotland said it has expressed condolences to the Bayo family, that the force would participate fully in the inquiry, whose independence should be respected so that justice could be served. The Crown Office said it examined eyewitness accounts of police and civilian witnesses and instructed appropriate investigation. After careful consideration, it was decided there should be no prosecutions, but it reserves the right to prosecute should evidence become available. Perk told us its investigation was detailed and extensive, and said as the public inquiry has now started, it would be inappropriate to comment on any specific aspect. The Scottish Police Federation told us serving police officers cannot comment publicly on matters to which they may be called upon to give sworn evidence. Its members cooperated fully and truthfully with the investigations that have taken place, and it has seen compelling material that Mr. Bayo did violently stamp on the back of Nicole Short as she lay unconscious. When asked to share this material, the Federation told us the inquiry was the proper forum for such matters. Deborah Coles of the charity Inquest provided support to both Sheku Bayo and Kevin Clark's families and believes race was a factor in each of their deaths.
I think in both cases there have been attempts to justify what happened by virtue of the extraordinary strength and dangerousness and potential to violence of the two men concerned. And that to me speaks about how racial stereotyping that equates black men with dangerousness and violence has seeped into police culture and practice.
Back in South London, as they waited for the inquest's verdict, Wendy and Talicia visited a mural commemorating Kevin.
I think if they hadn't used excessive force, he would still be here today. Like, treat him like a human being and not just see him as a big, scary black man.
Hearing from the officers, what shocked me the most is that a lot of them have said if the situation was to arise again, they would do exactly the same thing. And to me, that's like no lessons have been learned.
After 5 days of deliberations, the jury delivered a damning narrative verdict, deeply critical of the police and the ambulance service. The restraint and making him walk whilst barely conscious had contributed to Kevin's death. The Metropolitan Police accepted the jury's findings and apologised to Kevin's family.
In his memory, we want to see accountability and real change, not just in training, but the perception and response to black people by the police and other services.
The jury was not asked to consider if race played a part in Kevin's death.
I didn't need to spell out to the jury that race was a factor. To my mind, race was the elephant in the room. Sometimes you don't need to spell out the obvious.
There's no evidence to suggest in this case, certainly not that I've seen, that race or any concern that has been raised from anywhere outside of the family environment. Now, that doesn't mean to say that racial stereotyping or concerns around that weren't necessarily a factor. I don't know. But what I can say is that individually, the officers at the time have to make an assessment on what they're faced with.
Are you okay?
The family of Kevin Clark believe he was treated differently by police because he was black. The public inquiry into the death of Sheku Bayo is expected to last several years. It will investigate whether his race was a factor in his death.
It's got to stop. This has to stop. I am weary. I've done too many of these cases. The same questions, the same responses that I was getting 20, 25 years ago. This has got to stop.
Following the Black Lives Matter campaign in the UK, fighting the power Britain after George Floyd. Press red now to watch on iPlayer.